So this is all about the difference between brand identity and brand story, which I think is a very important distinction. And this is part of a longer presentation I'm working on right now, but this distinction is something that I think a lot of businesses miss when they're trying to think of how to build a brand that really resonates with people, specifically the people they want to attract, even if people don't really realize why. And this is true of business brands like the one I'm going to explain right now, as well as personal brands. But I'm going to keep it to business brands just because it's something that everyone understands. And if you have a business, even if you're not trying to brand it, at the end of the day, you probably have a logo, a website, copywriting, a target audience, and maybe even some IP, like what you are actually naming your products, services, programs, the ways you talk about things, like all that stuff is part of branding. So I'm using Skool as the main example right now because it is a new software. Well, it's not that new. It's been around for a few years, but it's definitely taken on more public attention in the last maybe month or so. And if you don't know what it is, it's a platform basically invented by this guy, Sam Ovens. Sam Ovens has been really big in the internet marketing world. He had masterminds and courses. He started as a Google advertiser and then sort of transitioned into a digital marketing consultant. And then over a number of years, he just built this super huge business and is someone who I admire a lot because we both believe in being sort of lean and simple while trying to maintain good revenue and profitability. So I see him as definitely one of my own personal business heroes. And he made this software, Skool, which is basically takes the best parts of Facebook groups mixed with platforms like Kajabi and tied it all together to give people who are like online, basically educators, you don't need to be an expert, but just anyone who has some kind of passion, the ability to make a community around that passion, to monetize that information, and to have all of your DMing, calls on a calendar, and also videos all in one place. So that's basically what Skool is. So this is the logo, and recently he did an interview, or maybe just more of a podcast conversation on the channel, and someone asked him how he came up with the logo, and I can just tell that he knows brand so well. Even though he wouldn't identify as a branding guy, he has utilized branding ideas and studied brand, and I can just tell by the way he was talking about this, and likely hired a logo, like a designer, to make this logo. But one of his reasons for what the logo was is what brand identity is all about. So brand identity is all the ways in which your brand or business is seen by the outside world. It is the logo, it's like the tagline, it's the color palette, it's the typeface. Like when we put together a brand guide or I make a brand guide for someone, I'm taking all of that, all of those identity pieces, and I'm putting them into a document that's like, this is the brand from an identity perspective. And normally this is where people just stop. Like this is like, okay, I've got the identity and I'm just going to stop there. But I argue you need both identity and story to make a really, really good brand. But let's focus on identity right now. So this is the main way that Skool communicates its brand identity, and it's through the logo. It is a very multicolored logo. You can tell that this font was either made from scratch or they took a long time to think of this typography. Usually in a brand, you don't want to use the same typography for the logo as you do in the rest of the body of the business. So you won't see this font probably used in any of their copy on their website. It would be another one. Most brands' identity have at least 3 fonts. They would have like a header font, a body font, like a header font, a subheader font, and then a body font. And then this 4th font would be the logo font. Now, one thing that Sam did from a identity perspective is he first thought to himself, like, how do I want this to feel? And that's where real, like, good brand identity starts. Most people look at a logo or they make a logo and they're like, yeah, I like it. But you have to think about why. And you have to think about why the audience will like it too, not just like, I like this, because you never know if it's going to fully resonate. So he said the first thing he did was, probably wasn't the first thing, but one of the things he did was Google the word corporate. I did it too. I Googled the word corporate. This is what it is. He said he stood back and he looked at everything and he was like, it was all blue and gray. That's exactly what happened when I Googled the word corporate, because he did not want it to feel corporate at all. He wasn't sure where he wanted the logo to go, but he knew what he wanted it not to be. And this is a really good way to start your relationship with brand identity and to say, like, what do I want this not to feel like? Then he Googled the word fun, and I also did that too. And this is what came up for me. I'm not sure entirely what came up from him, but he said he stood back and like it was all colors. It was just colorful. And you can see here, one of the pictures is someone in a ball pit. You just like get a totally different vibe. And he really wanted this software to be fun and to feel fun. So that's where the brand identity started. And then after that, what he did was he really was inspired, he said, by the 90s. He was inspired by the old school companies, the eBays, the Googles, the Windows. Like I even see here, like the PlayStations when I did some research to put this together. And these were some of the large brands of the 90s. And there was a lot of color. There was a lot of sort of interesting way of putting things together. And, you know, even with the Toys R Us up here, which I thought was interesting, when he said it, I had to think about it for a minute, and then I looked at stuff and I was like, wow, it's so true. You know, even Super Nintendo, like, so one of the things he wanted the platform to feel is he wanted it to be nostalgic. We're basically the same age. He's born, I believe, in 1988 or 1989. You know, he's in his early 30s, and he wanted people, even people who weren't from that generation, to have that sense of nostalgia, to have a sense of, even the way he built the software, of old school forums, because it was forums when he started to really work on the internet as a kid, and he wanted it to have that feeling. And so if we go back to the logo here, that's how this came about. It was this multicolored sort of fun experience that leads the brand identity, and then all the other aspects fit into that vibe of that old school, nostalgic, sort of millennial feeling of the internet. And if you go on the platform, you'll see that that's a lot of, you know, no frills kind of thing. It's new age and old school all at the same time, and that's clear in the brand identity and also in this logo. So this part starts, like, when you think of an identity, usually it falls into one of these 5 categories. There's this brand academic named David Acker, and he studied hundreds of thousands of brands. One of the things he realized was that they all kind of fit into 5 top categories. You've got sincerity, excitement, competence, sophistication, and ruggedness. So under these, like, you can have kind of a mix of both, but I usually recommend clients sort of pick one, and then we like dive deep into one as a way of expressing the elements of the brand's identity. And then this also will tie into the brand story when I get there in a minute. So we've got, under sincerity, we have things like down to earth, family oriented, small town, honest, sincere, real, wholesome, original, cheerful, sentimental, friendly. The brands that usually come to mind for me under sincerity are things like Walmart, Cheerios, Quaker Oats. Like a lot of food companies have to be under sincerity because there's a lot of trust that needs to be built. So that's kind of where you're getting that, you know, sometimes like mom and pop shops or like Aunt Jemima's maple syrup, things like that. The next would be excitement. So we've got things like daring, trending, exciting, spirited, cool, young, imaginative. That, to me, are things like Red Bull would be the classic example. Also, a lot of car companies, Porsche, they do also fit sophistication, which I'll get to in a minute. So I would maybe say that excitement verges more to Jeep or BMW. But as I said, they can kind of cross over, but ultimately you want to be dominating in one. Next, we've got competence, so reliable, hardworking, secure, intelligent, technical, corporate. You know, you'd see this a lot in IT. You'll see this a lot with banks, a lot of, you know, with cybersecurity, or just anything where it's super important that people feel 100% competent and confident in what it is. You can still have people feel confident in your business without picking competence as the main thing. Like if you're in the medical practice, I'd say you probably want competence over excitement, but that's why these things, these brand identity things, make such a huge impact on the success of a business and also their ability to relate to an ideal audience. If you've got a dentistry and it's all like branded like Red Bull, you're probably not going to do as well as one that's like really rooted in reliability. Then we've got sophistication over here, upper class, glamorous, good looking, charming, feminine, smooth. That's going to be things like Tiffany's. It's going to be things like Louis Vuitton. We're talking about luxury goods, and we're talking about anything that is meant to feel super sophisticated. It could be wines. A lot of the time would fall under sophistication. Of course, you can have an exciting wine and you can have a sincere wine, but mostly with a product, there's a brand already built into the product in a way, right? Because a brand, and this goes beyond the the scope of this presentation, but is ultimately about feeling. And I hope you're picking up on that from some of this. And so when you go into any kind of product business or you go into any service business, there's a brand built into it. There's a term called a challenger brand. Basically, a challenger brand will go into a market, pick a product or a service, and they'll just change the whole thing up. They'll just take it and be like, we're going to put a whole new spin on it. Sometimes that works and that people have a lot of success, but not everything can be challenger brands. So you want to think about your product or service and ask, like, what is already built into this from a psychological perspective, from a story perspective, and then pick kind of something similar so that you're not going like totally off the deep end. You're trying to already use what's already there. So all this to say about sophistication, you'll see it with wines, and maybe there'll be some overlap by, like, for instance, Red Bull's not trying to be sophisticated. They're just trying to go for excitement. And then lastly, you've got ruggedness, outdoorsy, glamorous, good looking, tough, rugged. This is things like, you know, the North Face, Patagonia. There's a number of car companies that would fit into ruggedness, specifically something like a Ford Bronco. You know, I find car companies very interesting, not just because I like cars, but also because they utilize something called a branded house. So they'll have the house has a brand, and then they'll have sub-brands that can really go cross-category. When you look at a very, very large conglomerate, they will make sure that they have sub-brands in every one of these spaces so that they can capitalize on, like, basically the entire consumer market. I would say that's not the best place to be for a smaller company. You want to really focus in, unless you're going to buy a lot of different brands in a lot of different spaces. But what a car brand will do, like especially like a company like a Ford or a GM, is each car will have its own brand identity. Apple is very similar to that too. The iPhone has a slightly different brand, I'd say, than, for instance, the Apple Watch. So when you're thinking of the identity and how you want your logo to feel, how you want your site to feel, you want to start with this and then think, like, do we match that, and why would our customers want to engage with us? And, like, is there that affinity basically between what they value and what they want and how they should see us, and like how we're actually presenting ourselves? So all this comes together, and in my opinion, it should start with story, because it's story that leads identity. It's story that tells you how to make something look. I just finished a film, and we make the poster at the end. I was just posting about this on Instagram, and the reason why you do a poster at the end is because the film is done and you've got your story and you understand what you're trying to convey. The poster is supposed to tell the story. It's supposed to communicate what's going to happen in the movie. Now, a business is basically the same thing, and to various degrees. You don't have to be the largest company in the world, but you should have some understanding of the story, and the story involves a who, what, how, and why. It also will lead into your design, emotion, copy, and creative. That will lead everything. So let's talk about story for a second. I'm going to move my little picture. So Disney has said, you know, one of their executive vice presidents said storytelling is in our DNA. And they don't just mean this because they tell stories for a living, they make movies, but they also know that Disney in and of itself is a story. It's a story of family, it's a story of belonging, it's a story of dreams, of magic, of miracles, of memories. It's basically the story of being a kid and feeling like anything is possible and that your dreams are possible. This was a story that was created by Walt Disney himself and has continued despite how large the company has gotten. They've had their moments where they've diverted, or they've had to repick up the pieces, or they've been criticized, but ultimately they have to come back to this story. It drives everything. Their strategy of making magic feel real to people is at the heart of everything that they do. So what is a story exactly? Well, a story follows a similar arc to this. We've got life. This is like the beginning of the movie. We've got life going. You know, usually when a movie opens, life's just happening. Someone's in their environment. We're getting to see them do their normal life. And usually they want stuff. They start going on a path, whether it's maybe to get a partner, or maybe they want to save the world. And then what happens is a bunch of things happen and it kind of knocks them down. And then once that they're down here and they're kind of in the dumps and they're feeling like, can I do it? And do I have what it takes? Usually in a movie, they'll meet a guide that then helps them figure out what to do next, because ultimately the hero of any story isn't capable of doing things by themselves. If you notice when you watch a movie, something happens. Someone comes in, whether it's Yoda in Star Wars, or someone will come in and help them achieve where they want to go, help them be who they want to be, and help them get to the end of the story. And this, my friends, is where brand really can thrive and sing. If you understand the path that your customers are on, it doesn't have to be the saving the world type of bigness, but it does have to be rooted in the understanding that people only buy things because of problems. And there's a few types of problems, which I'll tell you in a minute. But the only reason we do anything is because of a problem. We go to the movies because we don't know what to do that night, or the problem is we haven't seen that movie and we're super excited. We do things to get pleasure and we do things to avoid pain, and most things are somewhere in between, and it drives almost all the actions in our lives, particularly our buying actions. And so it's important to sit down and think about, like, what is my customer story? Where are they at? What do they want? And if we bring it to Skool, I mean, he has a bunch of experience working in this market. So the main story that he's trying to fill is easier business. I'd say he's also trying to be part of the story of community matters. He'd say community matters even more than one-to-one. Community matters even more than courses, and that's where Skool really comes in. The reason we want it, and I just even opened a Skool community myself, is because we want to feel like we're helping people. We want to help people together. And the problems that it was solving was the fact that it's hard to get everybody on the same page. It's hard to organize large Zoom calls across different time zones. It's hard to have people utilize multiple tools to get a result. And so that's the story that ultimately Skool is playing into and helping solve, and it's used in all the design and all the copy and all the creative. So the more you understand that, the more likely you are to be able to make a brand identity that fits that story. You're going to be able to make better ads. You're going to be able to write better taglines. You're going to be able to communicate with people at a deeper level. And this can continue to evolve. I've worked a lot on my own ability to understand my customer's story and where it fits into their lives, and it's still a work in progress. So it's not about just coming up with it right away, but it is about understanding that your customer needs to see themselves in some kind of end game, or at least feel it on a visceral level, so that you are able to charge higher prices, which is a whole other video, but also that you're able to communicate those emotions, because it's the emotions that really make people feel like, whatever that is, I want to be a part of it. Just do it. Let's talk about Nike for a second. I try not to use Nike in as many examples because it's just such a huge brand, and I don't want people to think that they need to be Nike in order to be successful, because you definitely don't. But what's interesting about this, just do it, is this is the story. You've got the brand identity here. You got this swoosh. There's usually a few parts of a logo. You've got an icon, which is this. You've got an entire logo, which is usually the swoosh plus the Nike written underneath. And then you've got the word mark, which would just be the Nike itself. And then this is part of their advertising. Just do it. But what's great about just do it is this is the story. Nike is saying, we know that you have things that you want to do. We know you have goals. We know you want to accomplish stuff. We know that you need motivation to do it. And guess what? We're here to do that. We are the guide that is stepping into your life right now and making you feel like a champion. And that's just delivered over and over and over and over and over for generations and decades, right? Like, at least since like the 70s, which I believe is when Nike started. So they've been able to just keep telling that story all the way back from when it was about the best possible shoes so you could be the best possible running athlete, so you could feel amazing about yourself. That's what this story is rooted in. And even the word Nike coming from victory, that's what Nike is. It's being victorious. And that's the story. It's capitalizing on another story. As I said, capitalizing on a brand that already exists. Victory is a brand in and of itself. It's emotional. You get it. You know that you've gone from a place of not being victorious to a place of being victorious, and naming it Nike was a part of bringing that into the psychology and cementing it in the ethos of its purpose. But let's talk about a whole other brand, one that I also am a huge fan of, Band-Aid. I use Band-Aids on a regular basis. I literally have bandages, not Band-Aids. I have bandages in my sink right now, not in my sink, but under my sink right now that are crappy. They're not Band-Aid brand bandages. They're just bandages, and they suck, and I can tell that they suck as soon as I put them on. And Band-Aid has spent a long time in technology. They've been like, we are the leaders of bandage technology, and I will say that remains true. What I love about them from a story perspective is that the main story that they're telling is a story of family. If we go back to those brand personalities, it's really about sincerity. There's a big sincerity piece here. There's a wholesomeness. There's a family element to it, and it reads in terms of all of their advertising. Now, from a story perspective, this is one of my favorite images. You move my face. This is one of their campaigns from probably maybe a year or so ago. And they're not just leaders in technology, but they're leaders in racial representation. And this picture, it doesn't even need to be video, and it doesn't even need to be words, but this picture tells their whole story. This is a kid who had a scrape on their arm or fell and is wearing a Band-Aid, and she's hugging her mom. You assume it's her mom, maybe it's her sister or something, but basically it's love. This kid feels taken care of. They feel loved, and by default, because the kids aren't buying their own Band-Aids, it's the parents now have a story of, this is a way to share a moment with my children. It's a way to feel loved. It's a way to be a good parent, and being a good parent is one of dominating leading stories within consumer product brands because it is so palpable, and you are finding stuff that already exists. This isn't about inventing stories that don't exist. It is about capitalizing and fitting into stories that already exist. Parents are telling themselves, they're debating, am I a good parent or am I not a good parent? And for Band-Aid to come in and reassure them and saying, you are a good parent. We believe you can be a good parent. We want to facilitate your experience in being the best possible parent you can be, is one of the reasons why they have, again, continue to dominate. They're under the Procter & Gamble house, and I don't think they will be knocked for being in a number one Band-Aid place potentially ever. I mean, at least likely not in our lifetime. So when we think about customer problems and what we're solving here, again, that problem in parenting is the question of, am I a good parent? We've got internal problems, we've got external problems, and we've got philosophical problems. Our internal problems are what we think about ourselves. So am I a good parent? Am I a good husband? Am I attractive enough? Do people like me? Can I do it? Or will I find love? Those are the internal problems. Our external problems are the things outside of us, are the things that we think we can't control. The economy sucks. I'm not making enough money. Spouse cheated on me. My partner doesn't take care of the kids. Or there's nothing around to do to have fun. That might be a reason why someone might pick one restaurant over another. Or, I want someone to see me a certain way. That could be another external problem that they feel is pushing against them, other people's opinions. And lastly, we've got philosophical problems. Those are the core tensions at play in society. We're talking about things like good and evil. We're talking about love and hate. We're talking about things like saving the planet, reasons for being, the philosophical problems of, can everyone feel love? Everyone deserves food. Everyone deserves shelter. These large philosophical problems are at the root of some of the best brands on earth. And if you can find a way to bring a philosophical problem into what you're doing, it will not just drive your brand strategy, but it'll also be great for your story and the way you share that story visually, and you can fit it into your brand identity too, if with a couple of design tricks or getting someone to help you design it so that it really feels it. And again, in your copy and in your advertising. If I take it back to Skool, I'd say the big philosophical problem, and I may have already touched on it, but the philosophical problem I think that he's working with is that everyone deserves to have a business. Everyone deserves to make money. Everyone deserves to have community and friendship, and that love and connection is the best thing that we have in the world. When we get all of those problems together, that's when you've got a great story. That's when you've got a really good brand identity. And I hope you've gotten something from this video. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk about your brand. I'm very into using brand to grow profitability and revenue, but also decrease complexity and help you optimize places within your business to more fit the kind of life that you want to have. Because at this point, there's millions of ways to operate a business and millions of things that you can do with it. So if you feel like you could be leveraging brand in a better way, feel free to reach out.